This is the flag of Portugal, but historically there was also this other flag that Portugal used. And indeed, if you look back at Portuguese history, you can see that a whole array of different flags were used at different times. And so in this video, I want to look at what's the history behind the Portuguese flag and why did it change so often? To find out the story of how this came to be Portugal's flag today, we're going to have to take a look at the history of Portugal, as ultimately this is completely intertwined with the history of its various flags and coat of arms. And a good place to start is by looking at the coat of arms of Portugal, which is indeed featured on the modern flag. The first attested use comes from the reign of Sancho I, whose rule started in 1185. He was the king of Portugal, but indeed the story of where the symbol comes from is actually quite a bit older than from his reign. On the shield are depicted the Cinco Chagas, which is the Portuguese word for the 5 holy wounds of Christ, which he is said to have received and then which miraculously, of course, healed when he came back. And so this actually comes back to a story from 1139 at the very famous Portuguese Battle of Ourique. And this battle was incredibly important for the history of Portugal because basically it saw the defeat of a Moorish army, the Moors being these Muslims of North African descent who had invaded the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD, and they were then defeated by the Portuguese under the leadership of a certain Afonso, who is Afonso I of Portugal. In the years after the battle, a legend grew up about Ourique, which said that the king had been visited by St. James, known in Spanish and Portuguese as Santiago, who had promised him a victory against the outnumbering forces of the Moors. And of course, when victory was delivered, this kind of stories often develop following such a battle. And it's actually thanks to this that we get this really veneration of Santiago or St. James in the rest of the world in the north of Portugal and the north of Spain today, and that's why Santiago de Compostela in Galicia was established there to venerate this cult, which then springs up around the story of the miracle of Ourique, as it was called. And this also finds its way onto the flag. Legend has it that at the battle he defeated the kings, the Moorish kings of 5 different taifas, which is an Arabic word for like a small kind of kingdom. And these were the taifas of Sevilla, Badajoz, Elvas, Évora, and Beja. And the fact that he defeated these 5 meant that symbolically he decided to add 5 shields onto the coat of arms. And these 5 shields each contained 5 Bezants. And Bezants is actually from an old French word, and it's actually found in quite a few medieval coat of arms. And these were actually coins that were based on old Arabic or old Kufic coins at the time. Often these were gold, but these particular ones are silver on the Portuguese coat of arms, but they're seen in gold variant, for example, on the coat of arms of the Duchy of Cornwall, which you can still see here, where there are 30 of these Bezants. And you can see here the Bezants are in silver on these 5 shields, and they're meant to represent the 5 wounds of Christ. So the Cinco Chagas in Portuguese on 5 shields. And of course, if you then have 5 on each shield, that gives you 25. And if you have the central shield twice, really, when you look at it metaphorically, that leads to 30 Bezants. And these 30 Bezants are meant to be representative of the story of course, Judas, when he betrayed Jesus, was given 30 pieces of silver. And then it's all symbolic and links well together. But there are some reasons to doubt this explanation and everything linking up so nicely. This may only have come in a little bit later on. During the reign of Afonso I, we find many shields and other depictions afterwards as well, with more than 5 shields. And it is the case that this legend only appears in chronicles in 1419, so the early 15th century, whereas these events are meant to have occurred during the mid-12th century. So there's quite a large gap, and this is probably retrospective history and trying to hagiographize his life in some way due to the contemporary events and to create a nice story rather than being based on actual evidence, although potentially this symbolism was sort of conjured along the way rather than being that way from the start. Now, what we can also see on this design, of course, are on the edges this red border with 7 castles inside. And these 7 castles also have an explanation. The explanation is basically that these were various castles, 7 castles that were captured from the Moors in the region of the Algarve in Portugal. And interestingly enough, the Algarve as well, you can trace that back to an Arabic word. So it's Al-gharb in Arabic, and that actually means the west, because this is well on the western coast of Portugal. Now, I thought that was an interesting bit of etymology there, but this idea as well that there were precisely 7 castles has also been called into question, that this again might be slightly retrospective and trying to add symbolism that wasn't there to begin with. The fact of the matter is that, as was the case with the Bezants and the amount of shields on this design, we find various and changing numbers of castles on various kings' designs throughout the Middle Ages on these Portuguese coats of arms. And actually one parallel that I thought was potentially quite interesting is that 7 in the Germanic world, and remember of course that the Visigoths, who had been rulers of Portugal and Spain before the Moorish invasion, and from whom the aristocratic classes were drawn, which would eventually lead the fight back against the Moors, and from whose family Afonso and many of the others would come, that in the Germanic world the number 7 was often taken just as to mean lots, and that's actually why you see 7 bomperblad on the Frisian flag. Again, because 7 just means lots. There were far more than 7 Friese Ceylon, so the Frisian sea countries, and potentially this is also why the number 7 was eventually chosen by those in Portugal, but that's quite a stretch. While the number of castles is interesting, we should also ask, where did the castle idea come from? And possibly this is a later thing as well, because in 1241, during the reign of King Afonso III, he's connected to Castile in that he married Beatrice of Castile, so he was married to a Castilian, and his mother was also Castilian, and of course Castile means castle, and they feature castles very prominently on their flags, and you can see similarities in the design there between the two, so it's quite possible that they came in during his reign. Of course, there is also a red banner around the outside, and the banner of Castile traditionally was a red banner with a golden castle in the center of it, which would later be transposed onto future Spanish flags as well. Now, let's go right back, and this is to look at the complete formation of the Portuguese flag and some important factors, because we somewhat have jumped into the middle of the flag story. And this is to go back to Count Henry. Now, Count Henry, he started his rule in 1095, and he had a very interesting banner. It's not really, it's just white with a blue cross. They tended to like that kind of thing back then. But what's important about King Henry, actually, and I don't really have a reason for bringing this up, to be honest, because it's quite a boring flag and I could have skipped this. The real reason I'm mentioning it is because he was Count of Burgundy, or he was from the family of Burgundy anyway. And do you know what Burgundy became later on after the Middle Ages? There was actually some point in me showing the shield rather than just to meme everyone with Het Wilhelmus, and this is because this is the basis upon which the next designs of the coat of arms and later the flag of Portugal would be based, from this very simple design of Count Henry, because as we've already covered, his son would then go on to add on the shields with the Bezants, and also to form the coat of arms by potentially adding castles around the edge, but that's probably a later development, although it should be said actually that we don't have any evidence that this flag was used by Count Henry, because he wasn't a king yet. This may have been a later Portuguese invention as well to make things align nicely. What we do know is that his son, if this was building on an older design, changed it to something more like this with the various Bezants on there and the shields, and this was because he proclaimed himself king after winning that victory against the Moors rather than being just a count, and when they received official recognition from various Spanish kingdoms, they decided to make this their official banner. And the story goes that the next development of this during the reign of his son and then future generations was that this was on a shield. So there was a reason that you often see coat of arms on shields. This is because they were portrayed on shields, they were painted on. And that during battles at this time there was a tradition not to paint over a shield once it had been scarred and scratched and battered in the various battles he was fighting against the Moors. And because of this, it said that parts of the blue cross had eroded and faded away over time, and because of the various engagements and blows that the shield had received, so that during the reign of his son, we see a different design. And actually that had become so faded that they changed the design because various parts of the cross had been lost, so that there were actually now 5 shields in the form of a cross with the Bezant on, rather than having a full cross. And this is very interesting, and later we see another development where then this gets taken on with the red border with those castles inside. But as you can see, many more than 7 castles on this coat of arms. This design dating to the reign of King Afonso III, and of course the castles and the red banner being added potentially because of his relationship with Castile through his mother and his wife. But I think that's the most likely explanation that we have there. Another change occurred in 1383, and this is because there was a succession crisis in Portugal at the time. And 2 years later, it came to blows with Castile, its large and important neighbour, and scored a great victory at the Battle of Aljubarrota. And during this battle, the Portuguese, and with the help of some English longbowmen, fought off the Castilians, who were aided by the Aragonese and also the Kingdom of France, and won a great victory there. And it's after this that John I, who was actually an illegitimate son of the previous Portuguese king, came to the throne. Now, he had actually been the head of the Order of Aviz, and so decided to add the symbol of the order, which was this green fleur de lis, to the banner of the Portuguese kings. And so you see that appears. Now, he also regularized the number of castles that were there, because he's added this fleur de lis that sort of crosses over. You no longer have space for all the castles, so he reduced the number down to 12. You had 3 sort of peeking around each corner. And it's said that during his reign as well, they went down from the number of the Bezants from about 11 to apparently 9. Although you can't actually see that on this design. On here, you can still see that there are 11 Bezants on each shield, which is a little confusing. And again, we don't know if they were being really very paranoid about getting the exact number of Bezants or shield or castles. Often in the Middle Ages, you just kind of made it look nice, and that was okay. Now you see that the change that has occurred here, you can see clearly with the green fleur de lis and with the 3 castles, that's there. But again, the number of Bezants on the shield has not changed. During the reign of his great-grandson, John II, starting in 1485, some more changes are made to the design that John I created. And this is to remove the green fleur de lis or cross of the Order of Aviz, and also to actually straighten up the shield so that they are no longer coming in at angles. Remember the story being that it had come from the cross that had then become sort of degraded and faded away on the shield, and he makes them all straight, so all facing downwards. But the big change comes in 1495, 90 years later, during the reign of Manuel I. And this is because, for the first time, they do away with the square design that had been firstly used on shields, and they get a real rectangular design. Congratulations, Portugal, and welcome to the early modern era. Now, in 1578, Sebastian, who doesn't actually get a number, he's just Sebastian, he really changes it up again. Well, not really actually, he just changes the number of castles. He fastened the number at exactly 7 castles, and this was the last time that the number of castles on the design would change. And he also changed the kind of crown that's on there, as well as shuffling a few things around. As you can see, there are a few changes made, and fixing the number of castles is important, but other than that, nothing drastic. Now, actually, he only reigned for 2 years. He died unsuccessfully fighting off the Moors and the Ottomans in 1580, and this caused a crisis. And after this crisis, actually, there was a union between Portugal and Spain, which lasted until 1640, when there was a coup d'etat, and when you got the crowning of John IV of Portugal. And he actually just basically went back to the old design of flag, adding, a slight change here and there, but nothing really major. Now, in 1707, we do get another change, and this is during the reign of John V, who was very much influenced by Louis XIV of France, who of course had been a very influential figure, and by other the French designs of flags and coat of arms and things like this. And for this reason, he decides to change the crown once again, not in form, but by adding a kind of red beret behind it. And you see this on quite a few coats of arms and crowns from the later 17th century and into the 18th century as well, that they do this. This became the regnal style, and the Portuguese wanted to become part of it, as well as, of course, the fact that the shape of the shield has changed. And the shape of the shield would continue to change after this period, with some monarchs favouring an Iberian-style shield, which was more of the squarer kind. Some would favour a more French shape of royal shield, and others would go for an Italian one. There's a few different changes that sort of fluctuate, but really you can see the different shields there. These are just based on various sort of international themes and trends in coats of arms and shields, and you can see that the colour of the velvet changes there as well behind the actual crown. But that's quite interesting. One interesting thing about this is that the monarch who started ruling in 1816, John VI, actually you can see because of the French invasion, the Franco-Spanish invasion of Portugal and the Napoleonic Wars, the royal family fled to Brazil, and they really proclaimed Brazil a kingdom from which to rule. And this creates all sorts of funny things in the history of Portugal, but it's actually, you can see it on the flag, and that's because you can see that this design behind the coat of arms has changed, and you've got this blue filling as well as this armillary sphere, which is the name of the kind of ball that you see, which was actually a tool that was used by mariners at the time, by those who were going around the world and finding spices and other things to navigate their way around. And actually this was a symbol of Brazil, and that's why he used it. The blue was also a colour that was associated with Brazil, so it was showing off this link between them. The kind of chronology is a little hard to follow, but in 1807, with the Franco-Spanish invasion of Portugal, the Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil. And in 1815, after the defeat of Napoleon, they declared the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves, which elevated Brazil to the status of kingdom rather than just a colony, which was actually quite an unprecedented move for the New World and is very interesting in its own regard. However, in 1822, when King John had gone back to Portugal, his elder son Peter declared the independence of Brazil from Portugal as its own kingdom, with him as its ruler. And actually in that constitution it said that you could no longer have personal unions between the ruler of Brazil and of Portugal. And this became an issue in 1826 when John, so the father, died in Portugal. And what happens then is that obviously Peter is ruling in Brazil. He can't then become king of Portugal. So instead, Peter's daughter, Maria II, becomes queen in Portugal. And actually, you see a very interesting flag. She goes back to this design. But the problem is, she was only 7 years old. And this was indeed a problem because her uncle Miguel, who was set to marry her when she became of age, actually did a power grab in 1828. And this sparked off a series of conflicts in Portugal called the Liberal Wars between the liberal supporters of Maria and the more absolutist traditionalist supporters of Miguel. And during this war, which was hard fought, actually the liberals gained the upper hand, and this was the banner that they flew in support of Maria. And as you can see, the blue now is on the other side. This is to still show some relation to Brazil, as that had been there before, but the armillary sphere has gone because, of course, Brazil and Portugal were now separate kingdoms, even though her father was ruling in Brazil at the time and her uncle was trying to claim Portugal. So, Christmas that year was pretty awkward. But they were successful in 1834, and when she became queen, she indeed went back and did indeed use this flag as hers. And this was the flag that was used by all Portuguese monarchs. Yes, they stopped fiddling around with it until 1810. 1910, I can't do numbers. This was due to the Republican Revolution of the 5th of October in 1910, which was a social revolution within Portugal, which led to the abdication of Manuel II, who fled to England and would be the last monarch that Portugal would ever have. And he, of course, was still using this lovely design that Maria II had been using during her reign, and that was finalized in 1834. So a long time they hadn't done anything to the flag, and now the last monarch had gone, so they decided to switch it up. Now they wanted to get rid of the blue colour and the white, but these had for so long been Portuguese colours, arguably, if we believe it, all the way back to Count Henry in 1095. Of course, there were other reasons why blue came back onto the flag later for Brazil and others, and it was seen as the colour of Mary. So a lot of the time, Mary, the Mother of God, is portrayed in blue for various reasons. There's lots of interesting things behind it. And so for a lot of the more traditional, a lot of the more religious people, the fact that they were wanting to get rid of the blue in favour of green and red was a big shock. Now, why did they want to add the green and red? We can also see some other familiar features on this more modern one. Well, green and red do have a fairly long history on several of the Portuguese flags. We've talked about the red being around the banner with Castile for quite a long time. Of course, some of the Republicans might like red because it's quite a socialist colour, or that it represents the blood of the fallen that fell during the revolution. So we can understand red. Green was a little more tricky. We do, of course, have the green fleur-de-lis of the order of Aviz, which was added onto the flag in the Middle Ages. But also these were important colours for the Partido Republicano Português, which is the Portuguese Republican Party, which were the ones who came to power and initiated the revolution on the 5th of October. And that's probably why we get these colours being added here. They had for a long time been Portuguese colours, on various flags and designs, and also they'd been used by the merchant navy during the Age of Wind and Sail, when the Royal Navy was using the white and blue ensign. The merchant navy actually was using green. We can also see that the old armillary sphere is back on the flag, and the reason for this wasn't because Portugal had suddenly re-annexed Brazil, but and this of course had been added first during the reign of John VI, but because of Portugal's rich and long maritime history and their naval enterprises that had been particularly successful and famous, and what they were known for, and that's why they wanted to add that there as a little shout out to their past as a maritime nation, as a successful naval nation. And of course the old coat of arms of Portugal that we've talked about quite extensively at this point. But before I round off, I have some very exciting news, and this is that History with Hilbert is finally releasing some merch. It's about time. I've been promising this for a long time, but I've been really hard at work, and I have some designs that I really hope you guys will like. I've been working with some artists and creators, as well as designing some of my own stuff. So in the next few days, probably in the next video, at the end of the next video, I'll be telling you, here's the link below. Go and get yourself something nice from the website. I'm very excited about that, but more to follow. So anyway, the merch will be dropping soon, but I think it's high time that I stop talking about Portugal and the Portuguese flag. I hope you have enjoyed this one. It's a little bit of a different topic, but I thought it was really interesting, and I've been wanting to do Portugal and all its various flags for quite a long time, because really they're super interesting, and whenever I'm making a video and I'm wanting to add Portugal and represent them with a flag, I think, oh great, here we go again, because it changes so often. You have to make sure, especially during the sort of era of enlightenment, that you have the right flag to portray them, because every monarch is doing their own thing with it. But I thought it was quite an interesting story. Let me know in the comments below if there are any Portuguese speakers, if my Portuguese was terrible. I was kind of vibing it because I speak some Spanish, and I know Portuguese isn't Spanish, but I was doing my best to not sound too Castilian in my accent. But anyway, let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Drop me a like, that really helps me out. And be hyped for the merch, guys. I'm really excited. There'll be a link below. Obviously, if you're watching this live, there won't be a link yet. But if you're watching in the future, then there should be a link to the website where you can get yourself some stuff. So anyway, this has been the history of the Portuguese flag, and I have been Hilbert. Have a great day.